Hey guys, so it has been a hot minute since I've actually done a video on this channel. There is reasons behind it, and I'm hoping that this update and explanation kind of ties in with that. So if you've been following me for a while, you guys will know that obviously I'm a single mum with multiple health conditions, and my children also have health conditions themselves. So I'm going to give you a rundown of the year and what's been going on in the past year. And then hopefully then you guys can make head and sense of it. So had my hysterectomy at end of January. Took 2 weeks to heal from that and get out of hospital. First week in hospital after the procedure was hell. Second week I was only there because the hospital had basically blocked my jejunal extension and I needed a new one before they'd let me out. So they spent the first week trying to kick me out of hospital and the second week having to keep me because they couldn't let me out without adequate nutrition, which was pretty ironic and karmatic as well, if I do say so myself. Then in the end of February, I went for a colorectal appointment. Now, if you watch my previous video, you will know that I have a pretty substantial rectocele and I have a prolapse of my rectum. So I went to see my colorectal doctor at the end of February, which I think was the last time I actually did a video. And they told me basically not to leave the country and etc, etc, etc. So I spoke to him briefly in that appointment about what happens if they get to a certain part of my procedure and find that stitches are not holding or whatever. What do we do? He said revert to colostomy. I did a lot of research after that appointment because he said that they could fix the rectocele, but only if they had gynecological input. So I spoke to gynecology at the end of April. Now bear in mind, while I was recovering from my hysterectomy, I lost suture stitches. So basically I lost sutures and stitches from inside, and that caused granulation tissue. I basically had complications from bleeding for 6 weeks after my procedure, after I came out of hospital. And when I actually had my procedure, my doctor, my gynecologist, basically thought he'd damaged my bladder because he'd bruised my bladder by moving it to like out of the way and stuff, and consistently called my bladder a floppy bladder, because obviously he thought he'd cause a problem because of the fact that the catheter kind of started glowing red halfway through procedure. So he thought he'd damaged my bladder, but luckily it was just down to bruising. So when I told him that, you know, my colorectal doctor was wanting him to have input in fixing my rectocele, given the fact that I'd already lost sutures and I had granulation and all this, that and the other, in the 13 weeks after my procedure I still wasn't fully healed, he basically said he wasn't going to go anywhere near it and fix it with him. So I asked him to put that in writing, send it back to my colorectal doctor, which he did, and then I also wrote a letter to my colorectal explaining the fact that I can't just think about myself when it comes to this particular procedure. I'd done a lot of research. I gave him statistics. So in basically in a nutshell, for somebody without Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is what I have, which has caused these problems, there's a 65% chance to 75% chance of this procedure failing that he wanted to do. Which is not ideal, and that's with somebody without the problems that I have. Add in the problems that I have and you're looking at potentially 100% chance that these were going to fail. Hence the reason why my doctor potentially told me not to leave the country, because he knew that it was going to fail and I'd probably be likely needing further surgeries done within a few weeks after the procedure had already been done. Now, forgive me, but I'm not the type of person, and I'm sure many people would agree, that would want to go into hospital every couple of weeks while healing because something has failed previously in a previous surgery, and do that on multiple occasions until it got to the point where there was nothing else to do but give you a colostomy. So I said to him, you know, if the outcome is going to end up being the same and I'm going to need a colostomy anyway, and there's a potential that this could fail so drastically even while you're doing the procedure to begin with, to the point where you're going to revert to a colostomy, it would make more sense for me to go straight in for the colostomy, because it's not fair on my children, it's not fair on my support team that I have around me to have to take time out of their regular lives, to take time out of work, to look after my younger children, to have my children worry every time I go into hospital for a procedure, only for it to fail a couple of days later or a couple of weeks later for me to have to go back in to have the same procedure again. It's just not fair on anyone, especially me, because I'm the one going through it. I don't do well with anesthetics. I don't do well with recoveries or anything like that because of my EDS. So Isla, leave the cat alone, please. Isla. Sorry, my dog is playing with my cat. So yeah, so I said to him, like, you know, this is going to be the situation. You know, I've also done my research on colostomies. So I explained to him that I'd done my research, and with somebody without EDS, there is a 25% chance of a colostomy failing, and there is around a 35 to 40% chance of a parastomal hernia within the next 5 years. So, you know, I understand that those risks are greater given my history and given my situation with my connective tissue disorder. So, you know, you're probably looking at maybe a 35 to 40% chance of failing, and potentially an 85 to 90% chance of getting a parastomal hernia within 5 years. But I would rather take them 5 years than several months of coming in and out of hospital to then eventually end up with the same procedure done anyway. Because I need to get back to fitness. I need to get back to being in the pool, to building up my core strength and everything. And at the moment, I'm not at a situation that I can do that. And I want to be able to take my family on holiday and do things with my family, which at the moment I can't do, because you're telling me that if you do the procedures, I can't leave the country. So I wrote everything down in a letter. Eventually he wrote me back and said he appreciated my honesty, he appreciated me doing the research, and he appreciated the fact that I understood where things were going to go along this line, but obviously there's a risk for further prolapse as well, with somebody with a connective tissue disorder having this procedure done. But he wanted me to still potentially go through the procedures he wanted me to have done, but he understood why I may not want to do that, and decided that it'd be better for me to speak to his colleague and have a second opinion. So I did further research and went to my second opinion in June of this year, and the other colleague was like, listen, you know your own body really well. You know what you can take, what you can't take. I understand completely why you want to do this. The only thing that he disagreed on with me was the fact that he didn't think a standard colostomy would be the right option. So he wants to give me a loop colostomy, which basically means that instead of having one opening, which would obviously allow me to go to the bathroom, I would have 2 openings. So I would also have the lower part of my bowel sticking out of my stomach, as well as the upper part of my bowel sticking out of my stomach. So the reason for this is because obviously, given the fact that he showed me my scans as well, there is a line that they draw, like an invisible line they draw from your pelvic bone down through to your rectum, and there's that line, you are not allowed to have any organs or anything else falling below that line. With my scan, they saw that my bladder was dropping below that line, and so was my rectum, but obviously my rectum was also scooping, hence the rectocele. Now, at the time, I still had my womb when I had this scan, so obviously my womb was keeping my bladder in place to some degree, which now is obviously not there, which could potentially be causing my bladder to now droop a little bit more. So the whole point of this was to have a conversation with him, and he explained that, you know, we have to offer these other procedures to you as an option. He said, but I totally understand where you're coming from and why you want to go straight for the colostomy, because there is a very high chance we're going to have to give you it anyway. So because I have such a significant rectocele, and because the way he put it was, if we leave your sigmoid colon and your rectum behind, it is still going to produce the mucus that your body naturally produces in order to help you go to the bathroom. He said, which is then going to collect in the rectocele, which is then going to mean that you're going to need to evacuate that anyway. He said, which is going to be harder for you to do because obviously there's nothing attached to that part of the bowel anymore, so you can't just go to the toilet like you're going to go to the bathroom and have a bowel movement, because there's nothing connecting those muscles together to the upper part of your bowel anymore. He said, so the lower part of your bowel is going to become annoyed. He said, and then you're going to get ulcerations, you're going to get other problems going on with it. He said, so ideally, he said, if we do a loop colostomy, any mucus that is starting to build up within that colon is going to start spilling out into your colostomy bag instead, and you will have probably less going into your rectocele. You may still have to evacuate some of it, but it's not going to be as much as if we left it behind. He said, now obviously if you're still having problems with this at a later date, we could potentially remove that lower part of your bowel and your rectum and then sew up your anal passageway. He said, and create what's known as a Barbie bum. He said, but he said, you know, if we did that at the same time as doing your colostomy, he said that is very invasive and it's not something that they would recommend because it's too much of a recovery and too much on my body to do that. He said, but we're happy to do that at a later date if that is required. He said, but we'll see how you get on with just a loop colostomy first. And I said, fine, no problem. Got no problem with that whatsoever. So that is the plan right now. I went to see my own colorectal surgeon about a month ago because I said, give me a little bit more time to think about it. But I'm pretty sure that's the way forward. And given everything that's happened between seeing my second opinion and going back to my colorectal doctor, it still feels like it's the best option. So that is what we're doing, and I'm now on the waiting list, and I should be having that procedure done within the next 3 to 6 months. So that's the colorectal side of it out of the way, and that's what I've also been fidgeting with in my brain for the last few months, trying to come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to have just one device on my stomach. I could potentially have 2 or more, because potentially it could affect my bladder even more so, and therefore I might end up needing more surgeries and more devices attached to my stomach eventually as well. And if this fails or goes wrong, I may also need more things attached, which is a risk that I'm going to have to take, because I've got to live with the consequences of actions that I'm taking. But obviously it still feels like the better option overall. And after speaking to a lot of people and speaking to my care providers and stuff like that, even they have said like it does sound like it's probably the more feasible option, to be fair. So that's one thing. You will also know that in previous videos I was telling you that I was trying to reject a vehicle that I purchased a year or so ago, because when I purchased it, the screen, that is basically the brain of the car, was not working, and therefore there was a lot of faults with the car, to the point where the car had even turned itself into kilometers per hour instead of staying in miles per hour, and turned back to a foreign language. I eventually managed to get that sorted out around April, May-ish time, and finally got my majority of my money back that I paid for the car, which I was really grateful for. And then in the May also, before I went for my second opinion, my son had to come out of mainstream school and start homeschooling, because his mental health had took a massive hit because the school was not catering for his medical or mental needs, despite the fact that they promised us for a year and a half that they were going to tackle these issues, and us sending in letter after letter after letter of medical evidence. They still were refusing to give him the education and the help that was required, that he needed in order to succeed through school, and that was massively affecting his mental health. We didn't take the decision lightly, or rather I didn't take the decision lightly, but neither did my son, because obviously he didn't want to leave his friends. I didn't want to take him out of school and him struggle at home. But I didn't take this decision lightly. So when I say we, I mean me and my son. We didn't take that decision lightly. We had a conversation with the attendance officer at school, with his head of year and things like that. And even the attendance officer was more like, you know, actually it might be better to keep him at home to educate him. So we decided for a couple of weeks to trial it out to see how it would work. And I then gave my son the final decision of what he would want to do, whether he wanted to stay at home and stay home educating at school, or whether he wanted to go back to school again now that he's had a break. And he decided that that is what something he wanted to do, was to stay at home and educate at home. And I wasn't easy on him. I basically made him do work, and he was even using his own initiative and picking up books and doing his own work without me even being here. If I had an appointment that I had to go to, he would be texting me telling me that he's doing some maths work and that he hoped that I didn't mind him doing that. So he managed to do quite a lot of work for the rest of the time he was in the year that he was in. So we stick to the curriculum. So we've been sticking to the curriculum for that. So I've been home educating my son for the last few months, and that's another reason why I've not been able to come on and do videos as well, is because obviously I put my family first and my health and their health priority. So yeah, apologies for that, but unfortunately this is just the way of life of a single parent. And then in the July, I noticed something was off with him. He was drinking profusely. He was disorientated. I thought his kidney condition had flared up, and turned out his kidney condition was fine, but unfortunately he had developed type 1 diabetes. So now we've had to navigate through that as well, which obviously he's been learning to deal with and learning to manage, which has been part of his learning, which has been really good as well, because he's learning health education, which is to do with his own health needs, and learning how to manage his own health needs, which has been really good for him. But we've also as a family been taught on how to deal with his health issues, so we've all had to come to terms with that. And it's not something that you can just pick up overnight. It's something that it switches and changes all of the time. So where his dosages of insulin were at, an insulin to carb ratio was one thing, it's been changed and switched around, and his nighttime doses have been changed and switched around, and it's just a matter of trial and error with it. So we're still kind of getting on to grips with that. So that's another thing that happened this year. So we spent the last couple of months dealing with that. And then on top of that, my feeding tube, which I got placed in February of 2022, not 2022, 2023. I had my feeding tube placed in February 2023, my surgical one in my stomach, and that was a Frecker Peg J tube. So that was a peg tube with a jejunal extension, but it was known as a Frecker tube. So that had a hard internal plastic bumper that situates inside your stomach, and then the jejunal extension goes through the gastric tube, through that plastic bumper, all the way through into your small intestine. But that plastic bumper is supposed to stay inside your stomach. I was always having a few like mini abscesses or ulcerations that would rupture and cause irritation of the skin and splitting of the skin around my tube. However, in August, so I was used to a lot of discharge, but this discharge as of August was so bad. I was going through 4 or 5 layers of gauze within half an hour of putting it on. So I was doing multiple cleaning. I was doing a lot of trying to fix this. I spoke to my tube nurse at the hospital, who then spoke to the gastric doctor, not my gastric doctor, but a gastric doctor. I hadn't seen at that point my gastric doctor for 19 months since they placed the tube. So they spoke to a gastric doctor, who basically said that because the gastric tube had not been in my system for 2 years, and they have a 2-year lifespan, but the word in that is up to 2-year lifespan, but because he was like, oh, they're supposed to last for 2 years and she's only had it for 19 months, I'm not going to change it, was his exact words. My nurse came back with, well, I could say a lot to that, so I would suggest you make an appointment with your own gastric doctor, because she thought he was my own gastric doctor, and I was like, no, he's not. So she was like, well, make an appointment with your own gastric doctor, which I did for the 2nd of October. And then within a few days, I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm going through so much gauze. It's costing me a fortune. I'm going to see if there's anything I can get on prescription to help with absorption, because I was due to go away for a few days. So I went to my GP, and then they sent me to the hospital with suspected sepsis. Now, I went to the hospital. They left me for over 3 hours. They sent me to the surgical assessment unit, and they hadn't even done bloods at all. This is somebody who's gone in with suspected sepsis with a letter from the doctor. I went to SAU, which is the surgical assessment unit, and they looked at me and they said, your tube is working, however, it does need changing, because the reason you're getting all of this leakage is because the internal bumper is not fitting or sitting right in your stomach. So that is why you're getting all this leakage. So it needs changing. Make an appointment with your gastro. So I said, I've already got one. So he said, okay, keep that. He said, and you can go. Luckily I didn't have sepsis, which was fine. And then a couple of weeks later, it became apparent that my feeding tube, which is supposed to be advanced once every single day, could not be advanced. It was just not advancing at all. So advancing means that we basically push the tube into my stomach and then pull it back out again, and basically that's it. So if it was just a standard peg tube, you'd rotate it as well, but because it was jejunal tube, you do not rotate them, because you can flip the jejunal extension. So I contacted the community nurses and I explained the situation. They came out, checked it, said, nope, you've got what's known as buried bumper, which obviously had been happening since August. We're talking like mid-September now, so it'd been over a couple of weeks later. I'd been struggling with it since beginning of August. So this problem had been happening for a while. She said, it's classed as an emergency. We need to get you into endoscopy to get a gastroscope done so we can get the tube removed and replaced. I was like, fine. So they thought to try and get me in. I had a contact with my tube nurse at the hospital on the Monday. I think this was around about like the 21st or 22nd of September. And then on the Tuesday, I got a phone call from the endoscopy department to state that they could get me in on the 4th of October. And I said the whole point of this is to get me in sooner, because I've got buried bumper, which is classed as a medical emergency. So they turned around and said, okay, we can get you in on the 1st at 8:30. So I was like, fine. If that's the earliest you can get me in, that's fine. I'll take it. By the Wednesday, I got a phone call. The Wednesday prior to the 1st of October, I got a phone call from the community nurse to see how I was doing. And I explained that I was struggling to get out of bed. I was sobbing on the phone. I said to her, it feels like someone's got a knife and they're cutting me open. And she said, I physically cannot move. I said, I'm struggling to get out of bed. I can't turn over. I'm laying on my back all the time, which is not helping my joints. And she said to me, like, I'd go to A&E. I said, well, A&E are just going to see that I have an appointment with endoscopy on Tuesday and just send me home. They're not going to do anything. So she contacted the hospital nurse, who then contacted the surgical assessment unit, told me to go on to there. They saw me, told me if it gets any worse, they could see that I couldn't do anything with it. I couldn't advance it. I couldn't flush. I could flush, but I couldn't aspirate any part of my gastric tube. And I was advised not to use the tube anyway. I'd been advised for a week prior not to use my tube. So by this point, I hadn't had nutrition either. So I was seen by them. They said they were trying to get me into an endoscopy slot there and then. They couldn't get me into one. I was told to go back the next day. In the morning, I spent 2 hours there to be told again, the same doctor from the day before, who knew I had an appointment in endoscopy the week after, couldn't see me, so therefore I had to go home and just manage, basically, and wait for a phone call. So I explained, like, that's fine. I was told if I didn't get a phone call to just go to my appointment as normal on the Tuesday the following week. By the Sunday evening, it just got too much for me, couldn't cope with it. Ended up going to A&E because I had redness spreading across my stomach, and I was told if it changed or something happened and I got redness spreading, to go to A&E. So that's what I did after ringing 111 speaking to a clinician on the phone after waiting 3 hours to speak to someone. After speaking to community nurses and everything, I was all advised to go to there by 3 different people. Went to A&E, got seen by them. Within 15 minutes, they sent me back up to surgical assessment unit, who were saying, right, we're going to admit you, we're going to do a scan, we're going to give you some IV antibiotics and some fluids, because obviously you've not used your tube for a while and you need fluids because you're dehydrated. They took some bloods off me. 6 hours later, I was told by a different doctor, who was telling me they were going to admit me, that they were going to send me home, that the gastric doctor that they'd spoken to the very first time I went to SAU the week before on the Wednesday, that they were happy for me to go home because I had my gastroscope the next day. So I said fine. So I went home again, after being dismissed again. Bear in mind, this is a medical emergency and they keep dismissing me. So I goes back in for my gastroscope the next morning to be told the doctor I'd been booked in with couldn't do a scoped jejunostomy extension peg tube, because they weren't trained to do them. And I showed them what I was dealing with. By this point, I had a lump, like a herniated lump on my stomach from my feeding tube. And it was turning black and I was in agony with it. And I said, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, what am I supposed to do? I was told, just ring the patient advice liaison department, and that there wasn't anything that they could do. All I could do was go home and wait for a phone call to tell me that my tube had arrived, because they had to order it. Now, bear in mind, I'd gone in the Wednesday prior, so a week prior I'd been in the hospital. They'd known, and even the gastric team had known a week prior, that I needed a new feeding tube. They hadn't even ordered one by the day I went in for my gastroscope. And then to make matters worse, the doctor that they'd been speaking to for over a week about me and about my buried bumper, basically, who kept on sending me home and telling me that they couldn't get me on their slot and everything like that, was apparently annoyed that I'd turned up for an appointment, because I should never have been booked onto an appointment because they hadn't ordered the tube yet. So massive complaints went into the hospital about that, and I had to attend a different hospital about an hour away from my home to be treated correctly with regarding my feeding tube, which eventually they removed because it had erupted out of my stomach on its own. So basically it was supposed to be plush inside my actual internal stomach, and it had ripped open my internal stomach, ripped open all of the internal the layers of my skin, including the external layer of my skin, and basically erupted out of my stomach and broke open this massive big herniation that I had on my stomach, to the point where another hospital had to physically, surgically remove it. And then the only thing that was keeping that tract open at that point was the jejunal extension. So they then had to put a Foley catheter in my tube site to keep the tract open for 3 weeks while it healed. And then they then had to use dilators to then place a new transgastric jejunostomy tube, with a balloon bumper on it, which I now have. But it took another hospital to treat me the way that my local hospital should have treated me. So like I said, massive complaints have gotten in for that. And then to put the icing on the cake, we had to say goodbye to one of our family dogs last week, because her mast cell tumours had got so bad. She deteriorated very rapidly, and if we'd have kept her going, she would have had a very miserable 2 or 3 months of time with us, and it would have just been 2 or 3 months of pain and suffering for her. So we made the decision to put her out of her suffering, basically, and we're able to collect her ashes this week. So that's been a big blow for us all. She was only 7.5 years old. My son in particular, he grew up with her. He was like 6.5 when we got her. So he's took it pretty badly. Both of my daughters have took it quite badly. I took it quite badly because she was basically like a therapy dog for me. We still have this one here, so we still have Isla. And then obviously we still have the cat, the 2 rabbits, and the turtles as well. But yeah, it's just been a very rough year. So I'm on the waiting list at the moment for colorectal surgery. And yeah, it's just been a lot to get used to, mentally and physically draining. I've not really caught up on sleep that I didn't get when my tube was playing up back in August. So I didn't really enjoy my trip either because of my tube problem. And it's just been a hell of a year. I feel like it's been a whirlwind, and obviously in the background there's still other stuff going on that I am not ready to talk about at the moment either. So there's still other personal stuff going on which is having a massive effect on my mental health as well. So, you know, having my son's mental health in the toilet, my daughter's mental health at the beginning of the year was in the toilet, then my son's mental health went took a massive decline. All of that had a massive effect on me. Then my tube care just went through the toilet. I only had my colorectal doctors actually listening to me, and the community and hospital nurse from gastro listening to me were surgical assessment team, and the gastro team had actually let me down. I finally saw my own gastric doctor last week, who said, well, who was making excuses for his colleague, despite the fact that I had a medical emergency and not a single gastric doctor took the time to even come and see me. So he was making excuses for his colleague, and yeah, I'm just fuming, to be honest. I'm hoping next year is going to be a little bit better, but obviously I started this year off with having an abdominal surgery, and I'll be looking like I'll be starting next year off with an abdominal surgery as well. So yeah, all fun and games, but this is why I've not been on. It's just been a mentally draining year, and obviously I've had to put my child and the rest of my kids and my own health and family and sanity and mental health first. So I hope you understand, and I thank you so much for getting this far in the video. I was hoping to do a quick update, but it's a lot to get through. So I'm glad that I've only managed to do it in half an hour or just over. So yeah, thank you so much if you've got this far for watching. I hope you understand why I've not been on. I know I say this all the time by saying I'm hoping to come on more frequently and do more updates and more videos. I'll do what I can when I can. Thank you so much for being patient and understanding. I hope you guys have an amazing Christmas, and I wish you all the best for 2025, and I'll hopefully come back stronger than ever in 2025. But until then, have a lovely Christmas. Thank you very much for your love and support this year and for your understanding, and I will be back soon. Take care, guys. Love you. Thank you, and goodbye.